settle in and let your breathing slow. The kind of slow that matches a sleepy street after midnight. Outside, Springfield is just porch lights and damp pavement, a little rain whispering to itself. You are at a desk with one warm lamp, one tired cup of coffee, and one old folder that never learned how to end. They like to call it a disappearance, like people simply vanish. But life is never that clean. Tonight, with the Sleepless Detective keeping you company, you will drift through the quiet details of the Springfield Three. 3 women, one ordinary house, and a morning that opened like any other, until it didn't. You open the folder, and the paper smell comes up first. Old ink, old hope. June of 1992, Springfield, Missouri. The kind of city that sits where the roads meet, where people pass through and sometimes decide to stay. Not too big, not too small. The kind of place where you can learn the shape of the streets without trying. 3 women are gone. Suzie Streeter, 19 years old. Stacy McCall, 18. And Susie's mother, Sherrill Levitt, 47. You read those names long enough, and they stop being names. They become rooms. A kitchen light left on. A car that should have moved by now. A phone that keeps ringing into the hollow. And the first thing you have to do, if you want to understand why this case still breathes, is accept what makes it so stubborn. There is no loud beginning. No shattered window that screams at you from the curb. No dramatic trail down the hallway. No neat villain's signature left like a calling card. What you get instead is the detective's least favorite kind of mystery. A place that looks like it's waiting for its owners to come back with groceries. You step into that feeling now, not as a tourist, not as a headline reader, but as the person who has to log what's real. Because in an investigation, the ordinary is not background. The ordinary is the last known truth. The house sits on East Delmar Street. Quiet, residential, the sort of neighborhood where lawns are cut and people wave and the night closes down early. If you stand outside in the dark, you can hear distant traffic, but it feels like it belongs to another world. Here, it is mostly crickets, rain, and a porch light humming softly to itself. Inside, it is lived in, not staged, not scrubbed. There are signs of a normal night folding into a normal morning and then stopping mid-sentence like a song skipping on a tired cassette. The furniture is where it should be. The walls hold the usual clutter of a family life. The air does not feel like violence. It feels like absence. And absence is a tricky thing. It does not leave fingerprints. It does not make noise. It just sits there in the shape of what should be. You look for the things people always look for first. Purses, keys, shoes, because when people leave willingly, they take the small tools of leaving. When they do not, the tools stay behind, like little witnesses. The purses were left, not missing, not emptied, not carefully arranged for drama, just left. That detail alone can make your stomach go tight if you have done this work too long. A purse is not just a bag. It is a tiny, portable life. Money, identification, a few receipts, a lipstick worn down to the blunt end, maybe a hairbrush. The kind of thing you grab even if you are only running out for a minute. The keys were left too, which is another soft problem. Because people without keys do not drive far. People without keys do not plan. People without keys are not doing the kind of leaving that requires a calendar. And the cars were there. parked like they expected another morning. Stacy's car, Susie's car, the driveway telling you without any poetry at all that whatever happened, happened close. You can already hear the mistake people make when they first meet this case. They think, maybe the girls ran off. Maybe they met someone. Maybe they made a reckless choice after a night out. It is a comforting thought, in a way, because it keeps the danger tidy and far away and blaming the victims. But the house refuses that story, because 3 people do not simply decide to start a new life at once, not without taking purses, money, and keys, not without leaving some kind of note, even a sloppy one. People who leave voluntarily tend to leave a mess of intention behind them. Here, the intention is missing, and congratulations, you have just arrived at the heart of it. How do 3 people disappear from one home in one night without a clear trace and without the house sounding an alarm? You walk through the rooms in your mind, slowly, the way you would in real life. You do not rush. Rushing is how you miss the small betrayals. The living room is ordinary. The couch does not look like it fought back. The floors do not look like someone was dragged across them. Nothing is overturned in a way that screams struggle. There is no theatrical chaos, no neat scene that gives you permission to call it obvious. And that is the strange softness of this case. It does not look like a crime scene at first glance. It looks like people stepped out and the world forgot to keep turning. But then you notice the little things that don't belong. The first one is so small, it almost feels rude to mention. A broken porch globe, the kind that covers an outdoor light, not dramatic, just broken. And broken things are common. Sure, they fall, they crack, they get bumped. But detectives do not get paid to assume. They get paid to sit with the discomfort of maybe someone brushed against it in the dark. Maybe it shattered under a hand that was less gentle than it should have been. Maybe it means nothing at all. In this job, the hardest phrase is not "we know." It is "we don't know." Inside, the phone becomes its own quiet chapter. There were reports that messages on the answering machine were erased. Not the whole tape, not a clean deletion that looks like planning, but enough to feel like someone wanted to tidy the narrative, or like someone panicking and clumsy hit buttons without thinking. You would love to treat that as a clean clue. Erased messages, therefore, someone with guilt. It makes for a neat line on a corkboard. But reality is never that polite. Sometimes a worried friend erases messages by accident, trying to leave their own. Sometimes someone thinks they are helping, and instead they smear a fingerprint across the only clean glass in the room. And that is another grim rule you learn early. The people who love the missing often trample the very things that could bring them home. By the time you have the house in your head, you have a list of ordinary objects that feel suddenly loud. A purse that should be on a shoulder, shoes that should be on a foot, makeup that should be wiped off at the end of the night, blankets that should be rumpled around sleeping bodies. The normal life is all still there. The people are not. So you do what detectives always do when the present refuses to talk. You rewind. You trace the last gentle, ordinary hours. The part everyone thinks will be boring. The part that actually matters. It is graduation time, late spring into early summer, when teenagers are suspended between the rules of school and the freedom they think adulthood will be. The air is warm. The nights are social. People drive around with windows down, music low, future plans loud. Suzie Streeter and Stacy McCall have just graduated from Kickapoo High School. On the night that matters, they are doing what a lot of newly graduated kids do: celebrating, drifting between friends, letting the evening stretch. Stacy had been at a graduation party. Suzie had been out too, spending time with friends. Nothing about the early timeline feels dangerous. No one reports a screaming match. No one calls in a threat that should have lit up the switchboard. Just normal teenage movement. A city full of cars doing small loops, from one house to another, from one driveway to the next. At some point in the night, Suzie and Stacy decide where to sleep. The plan, as it has been remembered, is that Stacy will spend the night with Suzie at the house on East Del Mar, where Suzie lives with her mother Sherrill. It is an innocent decision. It is almost boring. Two friends, late night, too tired to go home, choosing the familiar couch, the familiar spare space, the comfort of a friend's house. If you have ever been that age, you know the feeling. The world is big, but your safe places are few. You choose the safe place without thinking. They drive there. They arrive sometime after the parties wind down, in the early hours. Different accounts put it around 2 o'clock or so, the kind of time when the city is mostly asleep and only a few windows still glow. Inside the house is Sherrill Levitt, a mother, an adult, the person who, in every comforting story we tell ourselves, is the anchor, the barrier, the reason nothing bad happens. Sherrill had her own life rhythms, her own routines. She was known as someone who could be protective, present, involved. It is easy to picture her in the house that night, not expecting anything strange, just waiting for her daughter to come home, like parents do, maybe half asleep, maybe reading, maybe watching the clock without admitting it. And this is where the case starts to tighten, because there is no verified moment when someone says, "Yes, I saw all three of them alive together at this exact time, in this exact room." There is no photograph stamped with a clean hour. There is no security camera on the corner capturing them walking in. There is just the soft certainty of routine, the assumption that the girls got home, and the assumption that Sherrill was there, and the assumption that the night ended the way nights usually do. Assumptions are warm. They are also dangerous. Still, the cars are there the next day. The purses are there. The house is there. So the simplest working idea is that they made it home. They were inside. They went to bed, or at least they meant to. Then something happened, and you have to be careful with that sentence because it sounds like a thunderclap. In reality, something happened is often quiet. It can be a knock at the door, a voice you recognize, a request that seems reasonable, a moment of hesitation that gets swallowed by politeness. The myth is that crime always kicks the door down. The truth is that crime often gets invited in. If someone comes to the door in the early hours, who opens it? Maybe Sherrill, the adult, cautious but not frightened because she thinks she knows who it is. Maybe Suzie, comfortable in her own space, thinking it is a friend. Maybe no one. Maybe the door was already unlocked. And there it is again, that problem you can't stop touching, like a sore tooth. How do three people disappear without a clear sign of struggle? There are a few ways. and none of them are cinematic. One way is surprise, not the jump scare kind, the ordinary surprise of trust. A person shows up who belongs, or seems to. A familiar face, a neighbor, a friend of a friend, someone with a reason to be there. Another way is control, not necessarily a brawl, but a weapon held in the right place or a threat delivered in a calm voice, the kind of threat that makes 3 people comply because the alternative feels worse. For a moment. And another way is timing, catching people when they are tired, their brains dulled by sleep and late-night inertia. The same way you agree to a ridiculous pop-up notification on your phone at 2 in the morning just to make it stop. You do not read. You do not think. You comply. In the early hours, the mind is not sharp. It is soft, and someone with intent can use softness like a tool. By morning, though, softness turns into something else. Morning turns into worry. The next part of the case is not blood and sirens. It is phone calls. It is friends. It is that thin feeling you get when something is off. But you do not want to admit it yet. Stacy has promised to meet her mother later. Suzie has her own expected movements. The day is supposed to start with the typical post-graduation fatigue. Kids sleeping in, families regrouping, everyone moving slow. But calls go unanswered. At first, it is nothing. You tell yourself it is nothing because the alternative is too sharp. Teenagers sleep late. Phones get left in other rooms. A friend forgets to check in. You let it slide for a few minutes, then another. But worry does not arrive like a scream. It arrives like a drip. 1 call, 2, no answer. A friend decides to stop by the house. This is still the normal stage, the stage where people are helpful, not panicked. They are thinking about rides, about forgotten purses, about plans for later. They are not thinking about abduction. When the friend gets there, what they find is not a scene that explains itself. The cars are there, which suggests the girls are there. The house is quiet, which suggests they are asleep. There is no obvious alarm, but the front door is not doing what a front door usually does. Accounts have said it was unlocked. Maybe it was forced. Maybe it was simply not latched the way it should be. You hover in that doorway, and you feel it, that subtle wrongness that doesn't have a name. If you are the friend, you step inside anyway, because you are young and you are not trained, and the word danger still feels like something that happens to other people. You call out names, you look around, you try to be casual about it, like you are not nervous. You see things that should not be left behind. You see purses, you see wallets, you see cigarettes maybe, or personal items, the small artifacts of lives. And now, the worry changes temperature. Because leaving your purse behind is not a teenage quirk. It is a rupture. At this stage, people begin to do what people always do in the first hours of a mystery. They try to fix it themselves. They search the rooms. They check the yard. They ask neighbors. They call other friends, collecting tiny pieces of information that do not want to connect. This is the part no one wants to talk about later, because it comes with guilt. Everyone wonders what they touched, what they moved, what they erased by being human and scared. The phone, the answering machine, the erased messages. That detail becomes part of the legend, partly because it is so relatable. Everyone has fumbled with a device while anxious. Everyone has pressed the wrong button. Everyone has wished they could rewind a moment and not do that. And in a case like this, small mistakes become, eventually, the concern grows heavy enough that someone calls the police. The word missing enters the room, and once it enters, it does not leave easily. Now, you are in the slow part, the patient sorting, the part the movies skip because it looks like paperwork in tired eyes. But this is where the case becomes itself. Investigators arrive, and they have to do the first awful task: decide what kind of scene they are standing in. Is it a runaway? Is it a domestic situation? Is it a burglary? Is it something worse? Early on, disappearances often get treated with a kind of cautious skepticism because resources are finite, and most adults do not vanish into thin air. Most missing teenagers come back. Most stories have a mundane ending, but 3 people from the same house leaving behind purses and keys, that is not mundane. That is not a misunderstanding. That is a pattern. And patterns are where detectives live. They begin to catalog the little clues, the ones that don't turn into answers. The purses are there. Money is there. Personal items that should have traveled are sitting still. There is no obvious sign of a fight. No blood. No broken furniture that tells you exactly what happened. No clear point of entry that announces itself with confidence. A broken porch light cover, maybe. A door that feels wrong, maybe. An erased answering machine message, maybe. And every one of those maybes is the kind that can keep you awake for years. Because in a case like this, you can build 10 different stories out of the same 5 facts. You can tell yourself it was someone they knew. You can tell yourself it was someone passing through. You can tell yourself it was planned. You can tell yourself it was impulsive. Each theory can fit if you sand down the parts that don't. That is what theories do. They make you feel smart. They make the universe feel solvable. They give you a villain to picture. Evidence does not care what you can picture. Evidence sits there, silent, waiting for you to notice what you missed. And there is a specific kind of silence in this case, the silence of a house that does not show you what it wants. Think about the sheer logistics for a moment, in a calm, practical way. 3 people, not 1, not 2, 3. If someone tries to move 3 people against their will, you expect noise. You expect a neighbor hearing something. You expect a scream that pulls the night open. You expect someone to run or fight or knock something over, but the neighborhood does not hand you that. So you consider the uncomfortable alternatives. Maybe they were controlled quickly. Maybe they were threatened. Maybe they were convinced. For a moment, to go along. And maybe, just maybe, the person who did it had the kind of presence that makes people obey before they even know they are obeying. That presence can come from familiarity or from authority. A uniform can do it. A badge can do it. Even if it is not real, a confident voice can do it. A calm demand delivered like it is normal can do it. People are trained by polite life to comply, to open doors, to answer questions, to not make a scene. Politeness is a strange thing. It can be the last habit you ever practice. You look at the timeline again because that is what you do when you can't move forward. The girls were last known to be out celebrating. They likely arrived at the house in the early morning hours. By mid-morning, they are not answering calls. By late morning, friends are at the house. Soon after, police are involved. That is not a long window, and yet it is long enough for someone to arrive, to gain entry, to control the situation, and to leave without waking the whole street. If it happened fast, if it happened quietly, if it happened with just enough intimidation to keep voices low, and the case becomes this a locked room mystery, except the room is a normal house and the lock is human behavior. The evidence list grows, but it grows in the wrong way. Not with strong, bright clues, with dim ones. A piece here, an absence there. At some point, a detail emerges that feels like it should matter. The dog is there, or had been there. A dog is often a loud witness, a living alarm system, but dogs can also be friendly. Dogs can be quiet if they recognize the person. You sit with that. You do not force it. You just let it exist. If the dog did not raise a fuss, does that mean the visitor was familiar? Not necessarily. Dogs are not lie detectors. Dogs have moods. Dogs get confused. Dogs can be crated or distracted or simply not in the room. But it is another maybe that refuses to die. And then there is the question of what was not found. No bodies, no clear crime scene elsewhere tied cleanly back to the house. No definitive vehicle sighting that locks the story into place. That is why this case is unsolved. Not because no one cared, not because no one tried, but because the case does not give itself up easily. It is like trying to hold water in your hands. You can feel it, you know it is real, but it keeps slipping through the gaps of what you can prove. In the days after, tips would have come in. Tips always come in. Some are earnest, some are cruel. Some are people wanting attention, the way a child wants a parent to look at their drawing. Investigators would have had to listen anyway, because the one true tip can sound just as messy as the false ones. There is a kind of dark humor in that. If you can call it humor, the universe hides truth inside noise, then tells you to pick it out with tweezers. But early on, what you are dealing with is still the house, still the immediate circle, friends, family, neighbors, people who say, I saw them last at this party. People who say, I heard nothing. People who say, I thought I saw a van. People who say, I thought I saw a stranger. And each statement is a soft-edged photograph. Blurry, crooked, taken in low light. You pin them to your internal wall anyway, because that is the job. You also learn quickly that the simplest explanations are not always the truest, but they are where you begin. Did someone target the girls and Sherrill was collateral? Did someone target Sherrill and the girls were collateral? Did someone arrive for one reason, then adapt when the situation changed? Most crimes are not perfectly planned. They are improvised within a personality. A person brings their habits, their flaws, their impatience. They bring their ego. That is why perfect crime is mostly a myth told by people who have never had to catalog human stupidity. Still, some crimes are quiet enough and lucky enough to leave you with this: a house full of belongings and 3 empty spaces. And now, because you are the one holding the folder, you have to live with the uncomfortable truth that investigations are often built on what people should have done. They should have locked the door. They should have called sooner. They should have not gone inside. They should have not erased messages. They should have seen the warning sign. But should is a word that only exists after. In the moment, people do what feels normal, and normal is the most powerful drug there is. The longer you sit with the Springfield Three, the more you realize the case is not about one dramatic moment. It is about a chain of ordinary decisions meeting an extraordinary intention. And that is why it lasts in the mind, because the scene is so plain. You can imagine yourself there without trying. You can imagine being the friend who stops by. You can imagine being the mother in the house, hearing a knock. You can imagine being a teenager collapsing into sleep after a long night, half awake when a voice calls your name. You can imagine it. And that is the problem. Your imagination fills in what evidence cannot. So you learn to pull back, to stay in what is known. What is known is that by the time police understood the severity, the early hours were already gone. Footprints walked over. Doors opened and closed. Voices and timelines blurred. The scene contaminated by love and worry and the very human need to do something, anything. And still, even with mistakes, even with lost moments, you would expect some hard fact to emerge. A verified sighting, a confirmed vehicle, a found item. But the case keeps giving you the same answer over and over in different handwriting. Nothing solid. Just the house. Just the missing. You turn another page in the folder, and it is the same kind of frustration detectives have felt for decades. Notes, maps, interview lists. The same names repeated because you cannot ignore the people closest to the vanished. The same questions repeated because they never got clean answers. And you feel, in a quiet way, how an unsolved case stays alive. It does not stay alive through excitement. It stays alive through persistence, through someone, somewhere, reopening the file in the middle of the night, the way you are doing now, and asking the simple question again, but with fresh eyes. How do 3 people disappear from a home like that? And once the room feels familiar, you let your eyes travel, slowly, over the small, ordinary details that were left behind. Your eyes land where eyes always land in a quiet house. On the things people leave out when they feel safe. A hairbrush near a sink. A half-finished soda that went flat in the dark. A pair of shoes that look like they were kicked off, not placed. The kind of clutter that says, someone was here, and they expected to be here again. You move through it like a tired inspector, not because you enjoy it, but because the details are the only honest witnesses. People lie. Memory lies even when it means well. But a purse left on a chair is blunt. It does not care about your theories. And in this case, the blunt facts are irritatingly domestic. Susie's room, Stacy's overnight things, Sherrill's adult routine, a home that does not feel like it hosted a crime, which is exactly why it did. Crime likes places that feel ordinary. Ordinary places lower your guard. They make you polite. You keep circling back to the same ugly idea, the one that smells like cold coffee and overtime. If there is no obvious fight, then there was compliance. If there was compliance, then there was a reason, a weapon, authority, familiarity, or that particular social spell people cast when they show up acting like they belong. You picture the front door in the early hours. The paint is dull in your mind, the knob cool under your palm. You picture a knock, not frantic, not loud, just persistent enough to wake someone halfway. And you already know how that goes because you have lived it in 100 statements. You hear the words people say later. He seemed normal. He asked for help. He said there was an accident. He said he was police. He said he knew someone inside. He said, and they listened. Because in the middle of the night, the brain runs on habit. And the habit most people have is this: do not be rude. Congratulations, you have just found the most common accomplice in a house like this: politeness. It is not a clue you can bag and tag. It is not something you can photograph with a scale marker next to it. But it is there, hovering over every quiet disappearance where no one screams. Now you start doing the slow, unglamorous thing. You make the house into a map. You walk it in your mind the way you would walk it with gloves on, marking what makes sense and what does not. You ask yourself, where would an intruder stand if he wanted control without chaos? Doorways, hallways, the narrow choke points where a single body can block movement, the places that turn 3 people into one line. You look at the living room again. It is a room made for evenings, not for emergencies. Soft furniture? A television? Maybe a lamp that throws a warm circle on the carpet. Warm light is an enemy in a case like this. Warm light makes you want to believe warm things. But the evidence does not feel warm. It feels paused. The purses are still the loudest objects in the room. They sit there like they were dropped in surprise or set down because someone said, "Just a second. Just come outside and look. Just come with me, and we will sort it out." Just. It is always just. You think about keys again. Not just car keys, but the keys to the logic of the night. If keys are left behind, then whatever happened did not feel like a planned outing. People do not step into a car without keys unless someone else is holding the door open for them. People do not leave without keys unless they believe they will be back in minutes, or unless they are not the one deciding. And then you hit the part investigators hate because it is neither clue nor nothing. It is the answering machine. That little plastic box becomes a whole mood in this case, not because it is dramatic, but because it is fragile. A tape, a few messages, a human thumb pressing buttons at the wrong time. It is the kind of technology that does not forgive anxiety. Some messages were gone. That is what people remember. Were they erased by the person who took them? Were they erased by a friend who thought they were helping? Were they erased by accident? Or were they erased by time and confusion, turned into a story because everyone needed something to hold? You do not get to know for sure. You only get to know that, either way, it hurt. It hurt the way small mistakes hurt in big cases, because they can never be undone. And you can feel the investigation shifting right there in that quiet living room. From a missing persons call, maybe a misunderstanding, to something heavier. Because 3 missing people is already rare. 3 missing people from one address, leaving behind necessities, is rarer. And 3 missing people from one address with no clear struggle is the kind of rare that makes a department stop pretending it is routine. Still, reality moves at the speed of paperwork. You start with the most boring question in the world. Who last saw them? When? Where? And how sure are you? Really? It is graduation weekend. which means the city is full of movement that looks meaningless later. Teenagers driving in loops, parties ending in waves, parents asleep with one ear open, neighbors who heard a car door close and thought nothing of it. You build the timeline like a quilt made of scraps. Stacy at a party, Suzie with friends, both of them weaving through the night in that loose, careless way young people do. Not careless as a moral failing, careless as a luxury they think they have earned. They end up at the Del Mar house. That is the understanding. Cars in the driveway make it hard to argue otherwise. And once they are there, the timeline turns to fog. That is when you start listening to the morning. Because the morning is where the case begins to make noise. The first people who notice something wrong are not trained investigators. They are regular humans with plans, parents, friends, the kind of people who do not want a mystery. They want a ride to the next thing. Stacy is supposed to meet her mother. That detail matters because it pins normalcy to the calendar. A mother expects her child. The expectation is a leash. And when the leash goes slack, you feel it. Calls go unanswered. At first, you tell yourself the girls are asleep because that is the kindest story. Graduation weekend makes everyone tired. Teenagers do not wake up on schedule. Houses are quiet in the late morning, so someone drives over to check. You can picture that drive. The sun already up, the streets ordinary, a stop sign, a mailbox, a neighbor watering a plant. The kind of morning where nothing looks like it is about to become a case file. And then the driveway comes into view and you see the cars. Cars are such stupidly strong evidence. They do not speak, but they announce presence. If the cars are there, then the people should be nearby. If the cars are there and the people are not answering, the options narrow. The friend approaches the house. The door is not locked, or at least not secured the way a door should be when everyone is asleep inside. That detail is reported, argued over, retold, unlocked, forced. A broken latch, something that did not feel right. You step into the threshold with that friend because that is where so many investigations begin. Inside a home where you are not supposed to be afraid. You call out, no answer. And here is where the human brain does what it always does. It fills the silence with errands. Maybe they went to get breakfast. Maybe they went for a drive. Maybe they stepped out for cigarettes. Maybe they are in the shower and cannot hear. Maybe, because maybe keeps panic away. Then you see the purses. You see the personal stuff that people do not abandon for pancakes. And now the maybe starts to die. In many versions of This Morning, more than one friend ends up inside. People drift in like they are forming a search party without admitting it. They touch things. They move things. They sit on the couch. They pick up the phone. They try to make the house answer. This is not malice. It is love mixed with denial. It is the belief that if you just look hard enough, the missing will become visible again. But the house stays quiet. Eventually, the call is made. Police are contacted. And then the tone changes. Because law enforcement does not get to live on maybe. Law enforcement has to pick a category because categories dictate resources. Runaway, missing adult, possible abduction, suspicious circumstances. In the first hours, there is often a lag, not because police do not care, but because missing reports are common and most end with a sheepish return. People sleep it off. People take off with a boyfriend. People forget to tell anyone they went to a lake. But this, 3 at once, from one home, leaving money and identification, this does not sit comfortably in the usual bins. So you start the first sweep. You document the obvious. You check for forced entry. You note the broken porch globe. You look for blood, for disturbed surfaces, for anything that suggests resistance. And you find almost nothing. Almost nothing is worse than nothing. Nothing at least feels honest. Almost nothing feels like a person who got away with something and left you the bill. You canvass neighbors because neighbors are the cheap cameras of the world. You ask what they heard: a scream, a car door, a dog barking, a strange vehicle. And you get the kind of answers that come from sleeping streets. I did not hear anything. I heard a car, but cars are normal. I saw headlights. I saw someone in the distance. I thought I saw a van. A van becomes its own folklore in missing persons cases because vans are common and fear likes a shape it can recognize. White van, dark van, no markings. It rolls through tips like a ghost, never quite solid enough to catch. You take the reports anyway. You write them down in neat lines. You put them in the growing stack of things that could matter and might not. This is also when the city starts to talk. Springfield is not a small town, but it can feel like one when something goes wrong. People tell each other what they heard. They compare notes at gas stations and churches. Someone says, "My cousin knows someone who saw something." Someone says, "I heard they were mixed up with the wrong crowd." Someone says, "It was a drifter." Someone says, "It was someone they knew." Rumor spreads because silence is unbearable. Rumor is the mind trying to patch a hole with whatever fabric is nearby. And for investigators, rumor is a swamp. You have to wade in because sometimes truth is floating in there, but most of the time, it is just mosquitoes and mud. You begin to look at the last known contacts, friends interviewed, party guests, people who saw the girls earlier that evening. You confirm times the way you can, by comparing statements, by checking the few records available in 1992, by looking at the natural rhythms of the night. But you keep bumping into the same problem. After the girls arrive at the Delmar house, the story becomes a blank page. No confirmed phone call out. No confirmed visitor in. No neighbor with a clean siding at 3 in the morning. Just the fact that at some point in a narrow window of hours, 3 people went from present to absent. You think about the offender again because you cannot avoid it, not the face. Faces are too easy to invent, but the behavior. To remove 3 people from a home, you need a few things. You need a reason to approach without setting off alarms. You need a way to control them quickly. You need a way to move them without being seen. And you need luck. A lot of luck. Luck is the thing no one wants to credit because it feels like surrender. But sometimes cases stay unsolved because the offender had a streak of it. The street was quiet. The timing was perfect. The right neighbor slept through the wrong sound. And then there is the possibility that it was not entirely luck. If someone was familiar with the house, they might know where the squeaky boards are. They might know which light switch is temperamental. They might know the dog's temperament. They might know that Sherrill would answer the door if you said the right name. You do not get to assume familiarity, but you also do not get to ignore it. So you widen your lens to the social circle. Who knew the girls? Who knew Sherrill? Who had been to the house? Who had reasons? Romantic, financial, angry, desperate. In cases like this, you learn something bleak about motive. Motive does not have to be grand. It does not have to be movie villain dramatic. Motive can be petty. Motive can be opportunistic. Motive can be a person convincing themselves they deserve something, and the offender, whoever he is, had enough confidence to walk into a home and make 3 people do what he wanted. Confidence is not the same as intelligence. Confidence is often just entitlement with good posture. But it can be effective, especially at night. You start looking for any sign that someone tried to call out, any sign that someone was interrupted before they could react. In 1992, there are no smartphones to track, no location pings, no easy digital footprint. You have land, lines, paper receipts, memories, and whatever physical evidence you can coax from a house that looks too normal. That is when investigators often start focusing on what is missing besides the people. Is there any item gone that should not be? A blanket, a weapon from the home, a roll of tape, a length of rope, a vehicle that was seen but not accounted for. Sometimes, the best clue is not the broken thing, it is the absent thing. But again, this case resists. The home is not stripped. It is not ransacked. It is not staged like a theatrical crime scene. It is simply left behind. And you can feel in that left behind feeling how early mistakes become magnified. Because friends entered the house before police secured it, certain clean forensic opportunities were lost. Fingerprints get smeared. A doorknob gets touched by 5 hands. A phone gets handled. A message gets erased. You do not say that to shame anyone. You say it because it is true, and because true things matter when you are trying to understand why a case stays open. This is one of those quiet tragedies that come with missing persons investigations. The first responders are often not police. They are friends and family, and they do what humans do. They rush toward the void. By the time detectives arrive and start treating the house like a sealed container of truth, the container has already been opened. It does not mean the case was doomed. It means the case was harder. Harder is the word that follows you through these files like a shadow. Harder to establish a timeline. Harder to identify unknown prints. Harder to say who touched what. Harder to tell whether the erased messages were sinister or accidental. So you compensate the way detectives always do. You lean on interviews. You lean on patterns. You lean on the outside world, roads, sightings, reports of unusual vehicles, any call to dispatch that night that felt odd. And you keep returning to the same practical question. If 3 people left the house under duress, how did they leave? Through the front door, most likely, because the front door is easy and people under control are moved through easy routes. Back doors can be noisy, windows are awkward, front doors are normal. Normal is camouflage. So now you picture the street outside the Del Mar house. In those hours, it is dark. The porch light is on, or maybe it was. The broken globe suggests a disturbance, but not a catastrophe. A car could pull up, idle briefly, then leave. A neighbor might hear an engine and assume it is a late-night ride. A neighbor might see headlights and roll over in bed. That is all it takes sometimes for history to slip out of view. You also consider the possibility of more than one offender, because 3 people is a lot for one person to manage. But a single offender with a weapon can control a group if the group is frightened enough and tired enough. More than one offender increases complexity, but it also increases the chance of someone talking later. And decades later, talk is what you still wait for. But in the early days, you do not have decades. You have hours. You have the first 48 when everyone still believes the missing might be found alive and the streets are still warm with possibility. Search efforts begin. You check nearby areas. You check places teens might go. You check hospitals. You check any spot where a person could hide or be held. You coordinate with other agencies. You put out descriptions. You field tips. You triage the flood because every person with a hunch thinks it belongs at the front of the line. And sometimes they are right. Rarely, but sometimes. In the Springfield Three case, there are tips that linger in the public mind like old cigarette smoke, reports of a strange man, reports of a van, reports of hearing a scream, reports of seeing the girls later, but none of it becomes the kind of confirmed fact you can build a prosecution on. And that is the real divide between a mystery and a solved case. You do not solve cases with vibes, you solve them with proof. So you start looking for anyone who benefits from their disappearance, anyone who had a grudge, anyone who had been making threats, anyone with a history of violence, especially violence that looks like control. You check known offenders in the area. You check recent parolees. You check anyone with an obsession, anyone who had been hanging around the girls, anyone who made people uncomfortable. And here the case bumps into another brutal reality. There are always too many candidates. In any city, there are men with bad histories. There are men who like power. There are men who drift and watch and take notes. There are men who have done things before and would do them again. The question is not whether such men exist. The question is whether one of them touched this house on this night. You start comparing. You look for overlaps. You look for someone who knew the neighborhood or had a connection to the family or had been seen near the home. You also look at the girls' relationships because that is where investigators must look, even when it feels invasive. Ex-boyfriends, current boyfriends, friends of boyfriends, the people who have access and also emotions. Most of them will be innocent and furious about being questioned. Some will be innocent and helpful. A few will be liars because people lie when they are scared, even if they did nothing. And somewhere in that mix, you hope to find a crack. But the case does not oblige. Days pass. The initial urgency starts to cool into routine. Leads are chased and die. Search areas are checked and cleared. Every hour that passes makes the world less forgiving. This is the part that is hardest for families, and it is also the part that changes police work into endurance, because now you are no longer racing time. You are dragging a net through it. You keep the file active. You keep the faces on posters. You keep the phone lines open. You keep asking the same questions in different ways, hoping someone will slip. And the city keeps talking because people cannot stand a blank space. Springfield at night becomes a character in this story. It becomes the place where everyone asks themselves, could I have seen something? Could I have heard something? Did that odd car matter? You drive the streets the way you did back then? Or at least you imagine it. Commercial strips with late-night convenience stores, quiet subdivisions where streetlights make little islands on the asphalt. The kind of roads where you can go from busy to empty in one turn. It is easy to move through a city like that if you act like you belong. If you drive with purpose, if you do not look around like you are hunting, most people do not notice a confident stranger. They notice the nervous one. You think about that as you review tips. A person reported a suspicious vehicle. Another reported a man near a payphone. Someone else reported hearing a thud or a yell or something they could not name. And each tip has to be weighed against the most irritating truth in policing. People remember wrong, not because they want to, because the brain is a messy witness. It edits, it fills gaps, it shapes the past into something that feels like a story. You can hear it in interviews, the way people offer details they are not sure about, the way they say, "I think it was about," I want to say it was. It must have been. Must is not evidence. Must is just discomfort. So you build what you can. You create maps of reported sightings. You mark times. You check whether any of them can be corroborated. You look for the rare tip that has an anchor, an exact location, a specific behavior, a detail that can be checked. You follow those first, and you also do the slow checks that never make headlines. You see if the women's bank accounts are touched. You see if their identities are used. You check phone records where you can. You check whether anyone tries to cash a check, use a card, make a call. In 1992, the world is less digital. That makes it quieter, and quiet is terrible for investigations. No pings, no easy logs, no trail of app activity, just the physical world and people's memories of it. You sit with that and you feel why this case becomes a kind of nightmare for investigators. It is not just that they are missing. It is that they are missing in a way that leaves you very little to hold. And that is when you start paying attention to the smallest inconsistencies, because sometimes small things are the only things. The broken porch globe again. Not a smoking gun, but it is something that implies movement at the front of the house. It implies a bump, a contact, a moment of clumsiness or struggle. You ask, when could that have happened? Before the disappearance or after? That morning by a friend who did not notice. The night before by someone coming in. You try to place it, but the timeline is too soft. Then the door, unlocked. A door can be left unlocked by accident. People do it all the time, especially in neighborhoods that feel safe. Or a door can be left unlocked because someone wanted it that way, and you do not get to know which, but you do get to consider what an unlocked door provides. Easy entry, quiet entry, a way in that does not require breaking anything, which would make noise, which would invite attention. If someone entered through an unlocked door, you might have no forced entry to photograph, no splintered wood, no obvious crime, just a visitor stepping inside. Now, you try to put yourself in the offender's posture without giving him too much drama. He is not a movie villain. He is a person with a plan, or at least an appetite. He approaches the house. He either knows the door will open, or he tries and gets lucky. He moves inside, or he gets someone to open up. And then, this is the crucial part, he gets control fast, because control is the only way 3 people leave without a neighborhood waking up. A gun can do that. A knife can do it sometimes, but it requires closeness and risk. A gun provides distance. It allows one person to command a room. If you have never had a weapon pointed at you, it is hard to understand how quickly the body obeys. It is not courage, or cowardice. It is biology. The brain says, live. The muscles listen. So you imagine the scene as a series of quiet instructions. Do not scream. Sit down. Get your shoes. Come with me. And maybe, worst of all, the offender says something that feels like reassurance. No one has to get hurt. That line is almost never true. But people want it to be true, so they cooperate. They believe that compliance purchases safety. Congratulations. You have just understood one of the cruelest bargains in violent crime. The house then remains mostly undisturbed because compliance does not knock over lamps. The women leave, possibly through the front door, into a vehicle that is not theirs. They are taken somewhere else, where the real crime happens, somewhere private, somewhere controllable. That is one common pattern in abductions from homes. The abduction is the quiet part. The violence is elsewhere. But again, you do not get to decide. You only get to suspect, and suspicion without proof is just insomnia with paperwork. As days become weeks, investigators begin doing what they always do. They revisit, they re-interview, they check alibis, they look at anyone whose story changes, anyone whose timeline does not line up, anyone who seems too eager to steer the narrative. You also start getting the kinds of tips that arrive when a case becomes public. Psychics, confessions that fall apart, people claiming they saw the missing at a truck stop in another state, people who want to be part of something big. You log it, you check it, most of it dies. Meanwhile, the family's lives become split into before and after. Before, there were graduations and parties and normal mess. After, there is a house that feels like a question mark and a community that cannot stop looking at the empty spaces. And you, the investigator, keep working the case even as the world moves on to the next emergency. That is the job. New calls come in, new crimes happen. The file does not close, but it moves to a shelf that gets dusted more often than anyone admits. Still, some details keep pulling you back. The idea of authority. The idea that someone could have presented themselves as someone official, or at least confident enough to sound official. In the dark, with sleepy minds, a calm voice can wear any costume it wants. You start asking, were there any reports of impersonation around that time? Any recent incidents where someone claimed to be law enforcement? Any complaints in the area? Any strange encounters? You also ask about the dog again, because animals can sometimes cut through human social confusion. If the dog was calm, it suggests the intruder did not trigger alarm. But dogs can be bribed, dogs can be friendly, dogs can be shut in a room. So you do not let it become too important. You just let it sit in the evidence pile like a pebble in your shoe. In the background, the public begins to fixate on certain suspects over the years. That is what happens with unsolved cases. Names get floated, stories accrete, people build villains out of rumor and proximity. As an investigator, you have to be careful with that. A popular suspect is not the same as a provable suspect. And in court, popular means nothing. You need corroboration. You need something that holds up under fluorescent light and cross-examination. So you keep leaning on the same unromantic tools. Statements checked against each other. Timelines rebuilt and rebuilt. Physical evidence re-examined. And when technology improves, you go back to old items and ask new questions. That is how a case stays alive, even when it will not move. It breathes in cycles. A new detective takes the file, reads old interviews, and notices a detail that was dismissed. A new lab technique makes old samples worth testing. A witness who was scared back then grows older and tired and decides to talk. A suspect gets arrested for something else and suddenly feels chatty. Hope is not a loud feeling in this work. Hope is a folder that does not get thrown away. And as you sit with Springfield, you feel the shape of the city around the case. The late-night convenience stores, the parking lots that hold secrets, the quiet roads leading out of town, the places where a vehicle could go without being noticed. You also think about how quickly a person can disappear once they are in a car. 10 minutes, and you are in a different neighborhood. 20, and you are on open road. An hour, and you are somewhere that does not know your name. The abduction, if that is what happened, could have moved beyond Springfield before the first worried phone call was even made. That is the bleak math of distance. And yet, even with that bleakness, investigators keep returning to the beginning, because the beginning is where offenders make mistakes. The beginning is where they take risks. The beginning is where they touch surfaces, leave fibers, leave something human behind. So you keep studying the house, the door, the porch light, the phone, the routines. You ask, who knew Sherrill's habits? Who knew Suzie's? Who knew Stacy's? Who would feel confident showing up at that hour? Who would not fear being recognized? And just when your mind starts to settle into one theory, the case does what it always does. It reminds you that you are building castles on sand. Because the truth is, you do not have the bodies. You do not have the clear physical trail. And without those, every scenario remains a scenario. So you widen the circle and let the neighborhood drift into view, not as scenery, but as a living witness that simply did not realize it was witnessing anything at all. You let the street come into focus, because streets are honest in the laziest way. They do not care about your theories. They just sit there, laid out in asphalt and curb cuts, waiting for someone to admit what could happen on them. East Del Mar is not some cinematic dead end with fog rolling in on cue. It is a normal stretch of neighborhood. Driveways, low roofs, small trees. The kind of place where a person can stand on a porch and feel, incorrectly, like the world is predictable. Now you do the thing that makes you unpopular at dinner parties. You stop seeing houses as homes. You start seeing them as angles, lines of sight, sound travel. The way a car can pull up, lights off, and still be just another late return. The way a neighbor can hear an engine and decide it belongs. At night, the neighborhood is built of little private islands, each family asleep inside their own assumptions. And if you have ever worked a case like this, you know the cruel truth. Most crimes do not happen because no one cared. They happen because everyone cared about the wrong thing at the right time. You walk it mentally, from the Del Mar house to the nearest corner, to the cross streets that feed into larger roads, to the commercial arteries where a vehicle can disappear into regular late-night traffic. It does not take much. One turn, then another. The street lights thin out. The houses blur into darkness. And if someone is watching, if someone is prepared, if someone has the confidence to move like they have permission, then the neighborhood will not stop them. Because the neighborhood does not have a mouth. It has windows, and most of them are covered. The tips will come later, of course. They always do. But in that first circle, the closest circle, you get the sad little list of almost. Almost heard a scream. Almost saw a person. Almost noticed a vehicle. Almost woke up. Almost opened the curtain. Almost is what you write down. When the truth is quicker than the brain, you ask about the sounds that carry. Dogs, a door slam, tires on wet pavement, the cough of an engine that will not start. Anything. And most people give you the same answer, delivered with a shrug that turns into guilt weeks later. Nothing. I heard nothing. Because normal neighborhoods are not alert. They are asleep. They are trusting the quiet they paid for. So you widen again, past the houses, into Springfield itself. And Springfield at night is a familiar animal. It is convenience store light spilling onto the lot. It is a few cars cruising because they do not want the night to end. It is empty stretches where you can drive for 10 minutes and see no one. Then suddenly, a cluster of headlights at a late drive-through. It is the kind of city where a person can look for trouble without looking like trouble. Especially in 1992, before everyone carried a camera in their pocket like a nervous habit. You think about opportunity, because opportunity is what crime feeds on when motive is unclear. If someone wanted to take someone, or someone's, they would prefer a place that is quiet, but not isolated. A place where a vehicle does not look out of place. A place where pulling up to a house does not draw attention, because plenty of people do it. A party weekend helps with that. Cars coming and going. People assuming it is friends. People forgiving noise. And if you have ever been a tired detective, you know how it feels to chase that kind of logic. It is like trying to catch smoke with a clipboard. Now the rumors start to show up like gnats around a porch light. Someone heard a story about a van. Someone heard a story about men posing as police. Someone heard the girls were involved with something unsavory. Someone heard Sherrill had an argument with someone. Someone heard, someone heard, someone heard. And here is the part the public never wants to accept. Most of what you hear is not a clue. It is anxiety wearing a costume. So you learn to separate loud from useful. Loud is the tip that comes with certainty and drama, but no anchor. Loud is a man who calls in and says he knows everything, and then cannot tell you the color of the front door. Loud is a story that gets better every time it is told. Useful is boring. Useful is a time stamp. Useful is a name you can check. Useful is a vehicle description that matches something already in a report. Useful is a witness who says, "I am not sure, but here is exactly where I stood." You chase useful. You also chase patterns, because when the scene will not talk, patterns are the next closest thing to a confession. And the pattern here is the quiet entry. No smashed window, no blood in the living room, no obvious chaos. So you look for the kind of offender who prefers quiet, the kind who relies on compliance, the kind who does not want to wrestle three people on a carpet where a lamp could tip over and ruin everything. That kind of offender either uses a weapon or uses social control, sometimes both. Social control looks like this. A person shows up and says the right sentence. There was an accident. Your daughter's car was hit. Someone is hurt. We need you to come identify something. We need you to answer questions. It will be easier if you come with me. It is the same mechanism as a spam email, honestly. The message is urgent. The authority is implied. The request is framed as reasonable. And if you respond, you have already lost. The difference is, this is not a credit card number. This is your body. So you ask yourself, who could deliver that sentence at that hour and not be challenged? A neighbor, a friend, a boyfriend, a friend of a friend, someone the girls would not want to offend, someone Sherrill might tolerate at the door because she assumes it is about her daughter's safety, or someone wearing a costume of authority, the way some men do when they want the world to step aside for them. The neighborhood cannot tell you. It is just concrete and grass. So you keep expanding outward, to roads, to highways, to the places someone could go quickly without being seen. Springfield sits in a way that makes movement easy. Roads fan out. A person can be out of the immediate area fast. You can be in farmland. You can be in a different town. You can be in a place where the only witnesses are trees, and trees do not testify. Which leads you to the next phase of the case. The phase that feels like pushing a heavy cart through thick carpet. The long life of an unsolved file. This is where the public attention gets bored. But the work does not stop. It just changes texture. At first, you have the rush, patrol officers, detectives, search teams, phone lines lighting up, everyone working on adrenaline and bad coffee, maps on tables, photocopies, people speaking in short sentences because long sentences waste time. Then the case hits the wall of reality. No confirmed sighting. No recovery. No clear suspect you can arrest without making a fool of yourself in court. No neat moment where the evidence stacks up politely. So, the case becomes a routine, a rhythm. It becomes a folder that gets pulled, reread, put back, then pulled again when something new comes in. And the first thing you learn about long cases is that time is not one thing. Time is many things. Time is a witness who forgets. Time is a suspect who gets older and sloppier. Time is a friend who moves away and stops answering calls. Time is a parent who keeps the same phone number for decades, just in case. Time is an evidence box that sits in a room that smells like dust and cardboard, waiting for technology to catch up. You, the detective, will not be the same person through all of it. People rotate, units change, chiefs retire, budgets shift, files move from one shelf to another like quiet orphans. But the families stay. Families always stay. They stay with their own routine of hope. They keep a room the way it was. They keep photos on a mantle. They keep answering the same questions from reporters who want to quote more than they want the truth. And every time a new investigator takes the case, they have to do something that feels almost disrespectful. They have to start over because old assumptions rot. Old notes are incomplete. Old conclusions might be wrong, and you cannot inherit certainty. You have to earn it. So, you read the file and you notice how it is built out of ordinary paper. Interview forms, handwritten notes, timelines that look tidy until you stare at them long enough. You look for the gaps, the places where someone wrote, unknown, the places where someone underlined a phrase 3 times because it bothered them. You look for the dead ends, too, because dead ends tell you where people got lost, and sometimes where they were pushed. The Springfield Three file has had plenty of both. Over the years, investigators have revisited suspects, revisited tips, revisited claims that seemed promising, then collapsed under checking. They have had to deal with the basic cruelty of public fascination. People want a villain. People want a single name. People want the case to make sense in one sitting. But real investigations do not care about entertainment value. They care about what you can prove. And proving something decades later is like trying to read a book after it has been left out in the rain. Ink runs. Pages curl. The story is still there, but it does not sit flat anymore. And still, you keep going, because cases like this do not solve themselves with brilliance. They solve with persistence and luck, in whatever order the universe feels like offering. Sometimes, a witness grows old and tired of holding a secret. Sometimes, someone confesses to a friend, then dies, and the friend finally decides to talk. Sometimes, a suspect gets arrested on something else and starts bargaining for attention. Sometimes, new technology makes an old scrap of evidence suddenly valuable. That last part matters more than people realize. In the early 1990s, forensic science is not what people now imagine it to be. It exists, yes, fingerprints, blood typing, early deoxyribonucleic acid testing in some cases, but the routine use of modern deoxyribonucleic acid databases, the kind that can link a stranger to a crime scene years later, is not yet the standard tool it becomes. So, if there were samples in this case, small ones, skin cells, hair, saliva, they might have been collected and stored, but not actionable at the time, which means the evidence room becomes a kind of time capsule. Boxes sealed, labels fading, tape yellowing, and the modern detective, the one you are imagining now, can go back with new questions. What can we test now that we could not test then? What can we compare now that we could not compare then? Who is in the database now that was not in the database then? It is not glamorous. It is slow. It is paperwork and lab requests and waiting. Waiting is most of police work, if you are being honest. Waiting for lab results, waiting for a suspect to make a mistake, waiting for a budget to approve overtime, waiting for a witness to stop being afraid. And waiting has its own sound. It is the hum of fluorescent lights over an evidence table. It is the scratch of a pen. It is the soft clack of a file drawer closing again. Because today, there is nothing new. In the Springfield case, the waiting has lasted a long time. But the file stays alive in small ways. It stays alive in periodic re-interviews, investigators calling old friends again, asking the same questions with slightly different words, hoping the witness has remembered a detail they did not know mattered. It stays alive in comparing tips to known offenders. A man arrested for a different crime gets his history checked against this timeline. His associates get checked, his vehicles, his habits. It stays alive in the uncomfortable process of accepting that some theories are just stories. People love stories about secret underground spaces, about elaborate cover-ups, about villains so clever they leave no trace. Real offenders are usually not clever. They are bold, they are lucky, and they exploit the fact that victims are human. Human means you get tired. Human means you do not want to make a scene. Human means you open the door because you assume the world is normal. So the investigators keep their feet on the ground, even when the public would rather float. Over time, you also see how a case like this becomes communal property. Everyone has a theory. Everyone has a suspect. Everyone has a memory of where they were when they heard. And sometimes that helps. Sometimes it hurts. It helps because someone who was a teenager then might be an adult now. and might finally say, I did see something weird. I did hear that story. I did ride with that guy, and he said something that felt wrong. It hurts because public suspicion can ruin innocent people. It hurts because false confessions can drain resources. It hurts because rumor can become so loud that a real lead is drowned out. So you keep doing the same thing. You go back to the evidence that simply exists. The purses, the keys, the cars, the broken porch globe, the phone situation, the timeline that stops. And you keep asking the same question, not because you like it, but because it is the only honest one. What detail does not fit? Because if you can find the detail that does not fit, you can find the edge of the truth. Sometimes it is a door that was locked when it should not be. Sometimes it is a light that was on when it should not be. Sometimes it is a vehicle sighting that finally lines up with another report. In Springfield, one of the lingering frustrations is that too many details can be explained in more than one way. Unlocked door, negligence or manipulation, erased messages, intruder or anxious friend, broken globe, accident or struggle, a quiet house, compliance, or something worse. And you can feel how that ambiguity becomes a kind of emotional sandpaper. It wears you down. Families want certainty. Detectives want closure. The public wants a story that ends. But the case does not care what anyone wants. The case sits there like a house at night with the lights off, daring you to knock. When you have lived with cases like this long enough, you start to understand why they sometimes break open years later. Not because someone suddenly becomes brilliant, but because time changes people. A person who was afraid to speak becomes less afraid. A person who was loyal to a violent friend becomes less loyal. A person who kept a secret for ego starts to fear dying with it. And offenders, if they are still alive, get tired too. They brag, they slip, they revisit places, they keep souvenirs, they make themselves visible in small ways. That is why detectives keep old cases around, not as trophies, as traps. Because sometimes the trap only works when the suspect forgets it is there. So you keep checking. Every few years, you pull the file again. You compare it to new cases. You ask whether any new disappearance in the region has a similar shape. This is where crime starts to rhyme. Not in the dramatic way people imagine, but in patterns of behavior, a quiet approach, an entry that does not look forced. Victims who are controlled without a commotion. Belongings left behind. A narrow window of time. And when you find a rhyme, you look harder. You do not assume it is connected. You check, you compare, you see if any names overlap, any vehicles, any addresses. Most of the time, the rhyme is just coincidence. The world is full of similar stories because people are built out of the same weaknesses. But sometimes, the rhyme is a thread. And if you can pull the thread, you might unravel something. In the Springfield file, there have been periodic moments where investigators and the public both leaned forward. A tip that felt stronger, a search that seemed promising, a person of interest whose name traveled far. And then, often, the moment receded again. Because promising is not proof. Proof is a stubborn animal. Proof needs bones. Proof needs records. Proof needs something that can stand up in a courtroom where everyone is paid to doubt you. Which brings you to another cold reality. Even if you think you know what happened, You do not get to say it unless you can show it. Cases are not solved by belief. They are solved by evidence that survives attack. That is why an unsolved case can feel like an unfinished sentence for decades. Now, while that sentence hangs in the air, you notice something else. Your desk has more than one folder. It always does, because disappearances like this are not unique in the way people hope they are. They are unique in their details, yes, but the shape, the quiet gap, the routine day that turns into a missing poster, that happens more than anyone wants. So, you slide another file closer, not to distract, but to show the larger pattern, the way ordinary life can drop out of itself. You pick one that feels like Springfield's distant cousin, not identical, just familiar in its silence. A young woman leaves a shift, or leaves a friend's house, or leaves a store. A normal errand, a short drive. She is expected somewhere. She is late. Calls go unanswered. Friends assume the kindest thing first, because the kindest thing is what lets you keep eating dinner. Then the hours stretch. The phone stays quiet. The car is found or not found. A purse is left behind, or keys, or a jacket. And suddenly, everyone is studying the last known movements like they are holy scripture. In one file, the last clue is a vehicle parked in the wrong place. In another, it is a paycheck never collected. In another, it is a door left open just a little, like the house itself hesitated. Each case has its own small artifacts, and you learn to respect how small they can be. People want a villain with a signature. They want a note. They want a clear threat. But most missing cases do not give you that. They give you the absence of routine. The milk that spoils in the refrigerator. The pet that waits by the door. The phone that never rings again, except with people checking voicemail that is already full. So you open the first of these other folders. You are looking at the disappearance of Mara Murray from New Hampshire, February of 2004. A different landscape. Colder, sharper, snow and trees instead of damp Missouri streets. But the same human problem. A young woman driving at night. A crash on a rural road. A car left behind. Witnesses who see her, briefly, in the weird pause after impact. Then she is gone. You can stand on that road in your imagination and feel the cold bite, the kind of cold that makes your nose sting when you breathe, the kind of cold that turns time into a threat. You think she must have walked away. She must have gone for help. She must have hidden from embarrassment, from police, from consequences. Must again, that word. Because what is known is so simple it feels insulting. Car crash, brief window, disappearance, and the theories bloom like mold in a damp room. Did she run into the woods and succumb to the elements? Did someone stop and offer help? Did she get into a car with the wrong person? Did she plan to vanish? The investigators do what you would do. They search. They track footprints. They interview locals. They check nearby homes. They check for any sign of where she went. And still, the core mystery remains. A person was there, then, suddenly, not. You see the similarity to Springfield right away. Not in the circumstances, but in the problem. The vanishing happens in a narrow window. Narrow windows are where cases are either solved quickly or haunt you forever. Because if you miss what happened in that window, you spend the rest of your career staring at the glass. You set that folder aside gently because you are not here to solve Mara Murray tonight. You are here to understand the kind of world that produces these gaps. So you open another Asha Degree, North Carolina, February of 2000. A child, 9 years old. A stormy night, a small house where everyone assumes the child is asleep. Then, in the early hours, she leaves. Some witnesses later report seeing a small figure walking along a highway in the rain, carrying a backpack. A detail so strange, it almost sounds like a dream, which is exactly why it sticks. A child does not usually do that, not without a reason, not without being pushed by fear or pulled by trust. Investigators search. They find small items later. A backpack discovered far away, wrapped and discarded, tiny clues that feel both precious and useless. And, again, you meet the same set of questions. Did she leave on her own? Was she lured? Was she taken? And you feel the familiar frustration because each answer demands evidence. And the evidence is thin. A witness sighting in bad weather. A few recovered items. No definitive trail. The case becomes a long vigil. The family stays. The investigators rotate. The public dips in and out of attention like a sleepy tide. That is the long life again. The same rhythm as Springfield. So you close that folder too, not because it is closed in reality, but because you have made the point. Disappearances do not just happen to one town. They are a type of wound. You open one more file, one that is quieter in the cultural imagination, but still fits the shape. The disappearance of Brandon Swanson, Minnesota, May of 2008. A young man driving at night, ending up in a ditch. A phone call to his parents. A calm voice, then distance. He says he is walking toward lights, toward a town, toward help. You can hear the scene in your mind. The darkness on either side of a rural road. The sound of insects, the wet smell of fields, a person moving carefully, thinking the world is empty. Then, during the call, a sudden exclamation, a word like, "Oh no," and the line goes quiet. The phone is there later. The person is not. And what does that do to you as an investigator? It makes you stare at geography like it is a suspect. Rivers, ditches, culverts, old wells, places where a body can be hidden by accident as effectively as by malice. Sometimes the offender is not a person. Sometimes the offender is the landscape and the choices people make inside it. And that matters because it shows you something about disappearances as a category. Not every missing case is the same kind of story. Some are crimes. Some are accidents. Some are deliberate vanishings. Some are suicides. Some are a blend that refuses labels, but they all create the same aftermath. A routine shattered, a family suspended, a file that never quite goes away. Now you lean back in your chair, and the room around you feels heavier with all these unsaid endings. Not dramatic, just dense. And you start to see the gentle patterns that connect them, the ones that cling to your coat like mist. Disappearances often happen at the intersection of three things: trust, timing, and the illusion of normal. Trust is not stupidity. Trust is the default setting of being human in a society. You trust the knock at the door. You trust the person who sounds official. You trust the friend of a friend. You trust that if something is wrong, it will look wrong. Timing is the part no one can control. The moment when the right person is alone. The moment when a neighbor is asleep. The moment when a street is empty. The moment when a cell signal drops, or a storm covers sound, or a party weekend makes noise feel ordinary. And the illusion of normal is the biggest one. Normal is a mask that lets danger walk past you without being challenged. A person in a neighborhood at night can be anyone. A car parked on a street can be anyone. A voice at the door can be anyone. If the person acts like they belong, most people will let them. That is not weakness. That is conditioning. You can teach people to be cautious, sure, but you cannot turn a whole community into guards without turning life into something else entirely. Most people do not want to live like prey. So you end up with this uneasy truth. Safety is partly locks and habits, but it is also luck. It is also timing. It is also the fact that most strangers are not hunting you. And when you do this work too long, you learn the bitter flip side. All it takes is one stranger who is. So you start thinking about the small safety themes, not as lectures, but as quiet observations from a tired career. The first is that instincts are information. If a situation feels off, that feeling is not magic. It is pattern recognition working faster than language. People dismiss it because they do not want to be rude. They do not want to be dramatic. But politeness, again, is not a shield. It is a leash. The second is that check-ins matter. Not because you can prevent everything, but because time matters in missing cases. The earlier someone notices a routine break, the better the odds. The third is that in the first hours, well-meaning people can accidentally destroy evidence. This is not a moral judgment. It is just physics. Touches smear, objects move, messages get erased. If you walk into a house and something feels wrong, the best instinct is often the hardest one. Stop, step back, call for help, let the scene stay as it is. But in real life, people do not act like crime scene technicians. They act like friends. They act like humans who love someone and cannot bear the void. So, you get cases like Springfield, where the first response is a cluster of worried friends, and the very love that brought them there also muddies the water. That is why, when you talk about these patterns, you do it gently, because the point is not blame. The point is understanding. Understanding is what keeps you from turning every night into paranoia. Understanding lets you hold the truth without being swallowed by it. And the truth is that not every story ties itself into a bow. Some cases remain unsolved because the offender dies, or moves, or gets lucky. Some remain unsolved because the evidence is too thin. Some remain unsolved because the wrong early assumption steered the investigation away from the right road. And some remain unsolved because the missing are still missing, somewhere beyond the reach of search grids and interviews. Now, with all that sitting quietly in the background, you feel your mind drifting back to Springfield again, because that is the file you open first, and it is the one that still refuses to be filed away neatly. You picture the house again, not as a crime scene, but as a paused moment. The kind of pause that feels unnatural only because you know what comes after. You picture the porch, the broken globe, the front steps, that have held 1,000 normal footsteps and one set that mattered more than the rest. You picture the living room where purses waited like loyal pets. You picture the phone, its erased messages like a small missing piece of sound. And you picture the street outside, quiet enough to let a vehicle leave without anyone caring. You let yourself sit with the unanswered because that is what you have in the end. When the evidence refuses to speak, the unanswered is not just a lack of information, it is a presence. It fills the room. It changes how people lock their doors. It changes how mothers listen for cars in driveways. It changes how a city feels after midnight. Springfield has lived with that presence for a long time. Investigators have returned to it in cycles. Families have carried it in their bodies. People who were teenagers then have grown into adults who still remember where they were when they heard about 3 women who disappeared from a normal house like it was nothing. And still, the case waits. It waits for one person to say one sentence they have never said out loud. It waits for one overlooked detail to line up with another. It waits for time to loosen something that has been clenched for decades. You do not get to force that. You only get to keep the file ready. And you can feel how that readiness becomes a kind of quiet lifestyle. A drawer that is never fully shut. A note in a system that is never fully archived. A name that stays in circulation among detectives who trade old cases like weather. Because while the rest of the world craves endings, you learn to live in the middle. You learn to live in the part where the map is incomplete and the road just stops. So you do what you always do when a road stops. You stand there a moment in the dark and you look at the edges. Not for drama, for shape, for the faint tire tracks that say someone went this way and didn't want you to follow. In Springfield, those edges have been searched so many times they feel polished. Tips called in by shaky voices. Old interviews replayed until the tape in your mind goes thin. Names that flare up, then go dim again, because suspicion is easy and proof is heavy. You learn to treat certainty like contraband. You do not carry it unless you can justify it. Over the years, the case has attracted the usual orbit of possibilities. Someone familiar. Someone pretending to be official. Someone passing through with appetite and luck. The details let you argue each one if you are willing to ignore what contradicts it. And that is the trap. Your brain loves a solution more than it loves the truth. So instead, you keep returning to what stays consistent. 3 women, gone in a narrow window. Belongings left behind, the kind you take even when you're only leaving for a minute. No confirmed struggle inside the house. No reliable trail outside it. A crime that behaves like a whisper, but leaves a silence loud enough to rattle dishes. If you have ever sat on a cold case long enough, you know how it changes the way you hear a room. You stop trusting stillness. A quiet house stops being peaceful and starts being a question. You listen for what does not fit, like a song with one wrong note. And in this file, the wrong note is how ordinary everything looks. That ordinariness is why people still talk about the Springfield Three. It is not a complicated riddle with exotic clues. It is a normal address on a normal street on a normal weekend where something abnormal happened cleanly enough to escape the decades. That is the part that makes investigators squint at the page, because most offenders are not clean. They are messy. They improvise. They leave behind the kind of little humiliations that become evidence later. Fibers, prints, a witness who remembers their dumb bragging at a gas station. But sometimes you get the worst kind of criminal success. Not brilliance, just a sequence of small advantages. The door that was not latched, the neighbor who slept hard, the night when everyone had an excuse for seeing headlights, luck stacked like coins. You can spend years trying to unstack it. And if you are being honest, you also spend years watching the human side of it, the part that does not sit in evidence lockers. Families who keep answering the same questions, carefully, even when the questions are blunt. Detectives who inherit the file like a debt. Community members who keep the story alive, not because it is entertaining, but because forgetting feels like betrayal. Unsolved does not mean untouched. It means unfinished. And you start to realize there is a quiet mercy in that word too. Unfinished means the story is still being worked, still being carried, still being checked against new names when they surface, or old names when they resurface. There are investigators who return to these cases the way some people return to a childhood street, not because they think it will change, but because they want to make sure it hasn't. They pull old reports. They read them with modern eyes. They wonder if a sentence that seemed harmless in 1992 should have sounded different. They look at old tips and ask, did we dismiss this because it was weird or because it was wrong? And sometimes the answer is painful. Sometimes you realize it was not wrong. It was just early. It was a fact without a place to land. That is how cold cases occasionally wake up. Not with thunder, with a click, a tiny alignment of two things that used to be separate. A name, a vehicle, a pattern, a confession made during a different arrest, a piece of talk that finally meets a piece of paper. But Springfield has not given up that click, not yet. So, at the end of the night, you stop trying to force an ending, and you do the harder thing. You let the case be what it is, a file with weight, a silence with 3 names attached, a warning not shouted but embedded. You think back to the other folders on your desk, Maura Murray on a cold road, Asha Degree walking into storm dark, Brandon Swanson on a phone line that went suddenly blank. Different states, different years, different people, same wound. A routine day, a routine night, then a gap. And the shared lesson isn't that the world is always dangerous. It is that danger rarely announces itself properly. It borrows normal clothing, it uses familiar words. It arrives when you are tired or polite or in a hurry, when you are most likely to cooperate just to make the moment pass. Crime, in reality, is not a performance. It is an intrusion. It is a person taking advantage of the fact that you live like tomorrow is guaranteed. So you keep the safety themes gentle, the way you keep a lamp low. Trust your instincts, the quiet ones. Keep your check-ins boring and regular. Lock doors not because you're afraid, but because you're practical. And when something feels wrong, resist the urge to tidy it up with your hands. Because the first scene of a disappearance is often a home, still wearing the last moment of normal life. And normal life is delicate. It smudges easily. Now you return, one last time, to East Del Mar in your head, not to dramatize it, just to sit with it the way a tired investigator sits with an old photograph. The porch light, with that broken globe that may have mattered, or may have been just another piece of bad luck. The front door, ordinary as any other, carrying the whole question on its hinges. The living room, with purses left behind, like the women were planning to come right back. And somewhere in that house, in that small pocket of hours before morning calls turned sharp, 3 lives shifted from present tense to past tense without anyone outside hearing the moment it happened. That is what remains unsettling. Not gore, not spectacle, just the idea that absence can be made so quickly. You let the file rest on your desk. Paper and ink and patience. You imagine sliding it back into the drawer, not with finality, but with respect, because the drawer does not erase anything. It only waits. Outside, the city keeps doing what cities do. Rain on pavement, tires in the distance, a porch light humming over somebody else's safe assumptions. And you, still awake, still listening, except the only honest ending available tonight. The case is unsolved. The missing are still missing. The questions are still questions. But time has a way of loosening things. Memories, loyalties, tongues. Someone, someday, will say the sentence that finally fits the evidence. And when they do, another drawer will open. Another map will continue past the place it stopped. Because somewhere out there, another